Anyway, I'm going to, hopefully in the next 30 minutes, discuss a little bit the topic of sustainable buildings with you. I don't know who of you is at all in the real estate or building business. Can you raise your hand? Okay, but all the rest, you live somewhere, you work somewhere, you're in buildings 90% of your time. So basically, buildings actually matter to all of us, and I think this is what I would like to give as a key message. So buildings as a key to achieving the Paris climate targets. I always like to show that slide. That was in 2015, COP21, a big cheer around the world. Basically, everyone committed. We want to keep the global warming at 1.5 degrees, maximum at 2 degrees. And actually, I don't know if you know that, but at the COP21 in 2015, it was the first day that there was a buildings day. That there was, during the COP conference, a full day dedicated only to the topic of buildings. And that it had never happened before. But what has happened since then? Unfortunately, not so much. I have been at the last 3 COP conferences. This is a picture of the Spanish pavilion last year in Madrid for the COP, and that was basically the motto everywhere. Everyone was like, it's time to act now, action now. So it was a lot of motivational speeches. All the environmental organizations were kind of giving that message, but on the other side, listening to all the discussions, this problem or the conflict we have between the global south and the global north basically was slowing everything down, and we all know that there was no result basically. The COP then this year got postponed due to Corona. It will now take place next year in Glasgow. They're trying to keep the negotiations going, but it's very difficult in these challenging times. So the years go by, one report after another. We all know the importance, and the call for action gets kind of more and more urgent, what it would mean for our economy, what it would mean for refugee movements all across the world. And then we all know basically the new hope, at least in Europe, is the big topic of the Green Deal, which Ursula von der Leyen announced, and where now a lot of talk and action is happening within Europe. And the goal is to be, at least in Europe, climate neutral by 2050, the latest. So it's basically translating the Paris Agreement and the Paris goals, at least on the European continent. And a big topic that has been now moving, and I think this is actually maybe good news, maybe sometimes a little bit of scary news for some, is that actually the financial sector is waking up. It's already part of the Paris Agreement. There's an own paragraph on the financial agreement to provide funds to limit climate change, or at least to deal with the outcomes of climate change. And in the last 12 months, all of a sudden in Brussels, the Financial Commission started working on the so-called taxonomy. So they defined criteria on how to define a sustainable product. So basically a sustainable investment. Buildings are part of this work. So buildings is the top number 1 investment product, basically. And now there's a big push coming from the financial market, which I've been with the DGNB now for 11 years, and since I started, I always heard, well, if the financial institutions, if the bank, if the big insurance companies would recognize that we do sustainable buildings, we would do more. Well, now it's happening, and now you hear that basically the same people tell you, well, we need more time to prepare, and we have to understand, and what does it mean. So I think there's a big dynamic, and like I said in the beginning, I mean, buildings are everywhere. We all live and work in buildings. And I always find it very sad that sometimes it's just limited to an investment product, maybe one you can walk into, but it's basically just the numbers. And then we have for the climate goals in Europe as well, this sectoral approach where we look at different sectors. But if you look at a building from all the way when the material is being manufactured to the construction, over the use time, all the way to the end of life of a building, it all has impact on the CO2 emissions. So basically buildings are really the key when it's about achieving the climate goals or the climate actions. And I think this has been something that has been recognized more and more. People get that message. And another trend we're seeing, or I don't know if it's a trend, but more an awareness, which should not be so new, but is that it's important that we feel healthy in our buildings. I think now during the Corona lockdown, we all found a different appreciation for where we live, how we live. Do we have access to a park? Do we have a garden? How is our environment when we cannot really move around anymore? So all of a sudden we're locked down in buildings. And this is something that has to become more and more into the minds of people, that it's not only achieving, not only CO2 as the new currency, but as well to understand that buildings are really part of the solutions and have a very big influence on many aspects of our life and our well-being. Coming to us as the DGNB, we're an organization, we're an association. We were founded in 2007. And well, to skip this, what do we want? We want simply better buildings. This is what we're working on, to transform the building industry, the building markets, because we can do better. And I think this is my key message to you, is it's not rocket science to do a sustainable buildings. We can do that already today. It is not more important and not more expensive. It is not super complicated. We don't need more studies. We don't need more codes and regulations. If we want to, we can do it. And I think this is basically what we have to strive for, is we have to do it better. We just need to be better. We have to have more better buildings in order to have a better environment for us, and as well to do our part for the climate protection. Yeah, but then it's a big topic, and I always like to show that picture. How do you do that? You know, you have these big challenges in the media, you have all these reports. It's always this up and down between tomorrow the world is ending, and then you have these successful stories all of a sudden, and you always wonder, what am I going to do now? What is my part? The problem is so big, can I have all the problems of the world on my shoulders? And this is basically our key principle as an organization, that's animated, as an organization, as an association, where we said we can only do it together. And I think this is a key change we have to make, is especially for buildings, when it comes to architecture, when it comes to the investment side, come to a company, we have to move out of this marketing corner. We have to move out of this competition, who's more radical, who does it a little bit different. And we have to come together and work together, because we need to skip all these learning curves. We have to really think, what can we do as a community? How can we learn from each other? How can we understand each other better? And this is how we were, basically how we started, and we said we want to do it together. So we are an association, we're not a lobby organization, because we don't represent just one part of the building sector. We have a big variety of members. 20% of our members are architects, 20% are engineers, designers, 20% are building material manufacturers, all the way to investors, banks, cities, and actually companies who are not really in the building business, but they need buildings to fulfill their company needs, such as the automotive industry or supermarket chains or others. And when we started, you know, it's like to save I always say what we want to do is to save the world, which is a quite challenging task for an organization and in an industry which is very diverse, where basically every building is a unique undertaking, where they start basically from zero. We said we need to have a market transformation tool, and we decided to develop a certification system with all its risks and maybe challenges a certification brings, because all of a sudden you have criteria. Some people don't like criteria, such as architects, because it's very difficult. If you're very creative, you feel always it's just a limitation of your design freedom. But as I always say, the topic is way too important, as we can rely on our sustainability gut feeling, which happens a lot. People now, everything has to be built in wood. If people see wood, they think it's sustainable automatically. This is not the case. And it is more important that and because it's so important, we need to measure it. We cannot rely on self-declaration marketing slogans and all these, what we hear, we're doing that already. And if you go on the websites of big companies, you sometimes feel you're on the website of an environmental organization. And last year in Madrid, it was actually, there was a discussion as well about how can we change achieve the Paris Agreement goals in the building sector, especially in countries like in Africa or South Asia, where they have a lot of informal settlements. So there's not even the question on what can we do with codes, because they don't really know who's building what where. And then there was a podium of how it is at the COP. You know, you have someone from the ministry, you have someone from a big corporation there as well. And they were basically, bragging a little bit. You know, it's always, if you talk to people, they always tell you how great they do. And then in the end, one of the representatives of one of the African countries got up and he said, well, he's a little bit confused, because if all the companies are saving the world, who are the ones destroying it then? And I think this is really where we have to stop believing these things, and we really have to question these marketing slogans. And this is where we said, let's do it with a certification system. Let's measure what we have. Let's understand what we have so we can build on it, we can learn from it, and we can all work towards a similar or the same goal. Because if everyone defines their own goal, how are we going to save the world? For someone, it's I build in wood, it's good. Someone else does something else. So this is where we said, let's do that through a certification. We've developed the DGNB system. We've certified now around 7,000 projects in more than 29 countries. Our main market, so-called, is Germany. But we're working a lot internationally. And this is, to me, always very important. We didn't reinvent the wheel either, and we didn't invent sustainability. What we did is we used the ISO definition of what sustainability is, the traditional three-column approach, and we basically brought together members, and I think this is the big treasure we have as an organization. We have more than 500 individuals from these 1,200 member organizations who work voluntarily in our working groups. So this is an ongoing learning, improving process, and so we just defined it, and I always like to translate sustainability as quality and future-proofed, because I think this is what it is about. We have to have a different understanding for our built environment. I don't know who of you, I think you were here already yesterday, sitting in this room, has asked yourself, do you feel good in this room? Do you feel comfortable? Do you like the lighting? Do you like the temperature? Wouldn't it be nice to see some greenery outside? So, and I think this is what we're lacking is in the building industry, the sense of quality. It's always about being quick and as inexpensive as possible. And I always compare it, coming from Stuttgart, with the automotive industry. No one would buy a car where you need to practice for 5 years until it works properly. In buildings, that's completely normal. You go into a new building and people tell you, that doesn't work really, it's new. This we have to check, and this we have to see, and there we have to get the expert. And then, you know, we're wondering why people are always very emotional if there's a construction site going on. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy, and this is, I think, what we need to change. So we have to talk about quality, and we have to talk about future-proofness, because buildings are there for a long time, for 50 years. So we're in the middle of climate change. So it's not enough to fulfill the codes today and the laws, because they're all looking backwards the way they are developed. So what we need is we need to look what is coming ahead, and we have to design our buildings that way. Yeah, and it's it's complicated. And I think this is maybe as well the sad message sometimes. It always depends. I always sometimes feel like, I don't know who of you is a lawyer, so I don't want to offend you. But the typical thing a lawyer tells you is, well, it depends. The liability is with you, so it depends. Unfortunately, with sustainability in buildings, it's sometimes the same way, because it always depends. What do you want to build? Where do you want to build? For whom do you build? What is your budget? So it's not this, and I think this is what we have to accept. A sustainable building is not the show-off building automatically. It's not about putting greenery on the roof, on the facade, making everything in wood, and then it's automatically sustainable. Sustainability is more. It's the energy concept. It is the quality of the materials you put into a building, especially glues, paints, that there are no toxins, no VOC emissions. So it's this whole variety of things. And what we do with our certifications, basically we create this kind of transparency that at least people make a choice based on knowledge and facts, and not based on gut feelings or what they think the budget could do or could not do. So I think this is what we need to accept. Sustainability is always a conflict of goals. And But we have to look ahead, like I said, so this is kind of the DNA of our system. I'm going to skip that, otherwise we're going to talk for a long time. If you're interested, it's 38 criteria, so we can discuss that over a coffee if you're really interested in. And 300 pages for a self-study, it's maybe a nice thing to do on a Sunday. Coming back to climate action. So one thing is to have a certification. What does a certification do? It defines things. And as well, it gives you the opportunity to come up with a strategy. Because this is what we need. We're in for a long-term thing, especially when it's with buildings. This is not a sprint, this is a marathon. So for a marathon, we need to have a strategy on how do we maintain our buildings. This is an ongoing process, and for that, we need to have a strategy. And we define basically, based on our experience and based on a framework we've developed with many, many experts on what is a carbon neutral building and city district, because this is actually right now the big discussion, what does carbon neutral mean? And I always say, especially when you're in Brussels in these working groups, it sometimes feels like the discussion is more how far away from zero can I be and still pretend it's carbon neutral. And we said, no, it's not. The goal is 0. This is not 5, it's not 10. It is 0 CO2 emissions per square meter per year, looking over 12 months, over a 12-month period. And then we have to have a plan, how do we get there? And that plan basically gives you then the opportunity to look into your budgets, what are your timeframes, because a carbon neutral building in operation today is not automatically carbon neutral in 5 years if you don't do something with that. Because it depends on the energy mix. The more we have green energy in the grid, the more challenging it will be for the building. If you don't have energy production on your own site, it is quite challenging. So you have to have a plan on how you do that. You have to report it, and you have to as well do a quality assurance of the information you have. Because in the end, we're all just people, and someone is plugging in numbers and maybe is putting the 0 wrong, and all of a sudden you have something completely different. So it's very important that we talk about the reality, that we measure what we have and that we have a plan. And yeah, you can download that on our website. I don't want to go into detail. Maybe just give you the 4 key indications where we didn't make a lot of friends in the real estate industry with our definition, but we said, but it's the right thing to do. So like I said, the goal is 0. It is non-negotiable. This is what we have to aim for with every building. If we get there or not, this is another question. But if we already question the goal, how can we have a clear strategy to get there? So at least we have to try to get with every building to 0. It doesn't matter if it's residential, it doesn't matter if it's shopping center or an office building or whatsoever. 0. We have to take the complete energy balance as a basic, so including the user consumption. And this is, I don't know, the ones of you who are in construction, you know the NF, and now the new GEG, the new regulation. It doesn't take the user consumption into account. So if you have a shopping center, they don't look at the energy consumption of elevators, escalators, and so forth. And then people always wonder, why doesn't it match what it really consumes versus what I calculated in the approval process? So this is where we see the biggest part and basically the biggest responsibility as well for companies to get their people on board, to think about how do they operate the buildings, with how much IT do they do that, where do they use the energy in a building, because a building can be very good. If you have a user who just doesn't care, the building will be not carbon neutral and it will never get there. So it has to be this, balance. We look at the actual CO2 intensity, meaning even PV electricity or from wind mills has CO2 emissions. They are small, but there are CO2 emissions actually as well from those technologies. And you have to try to compensate or avoid CO2 emissions on your own site. What we don't want to push for is compensation, where you basically buy a forest somewhere in a very far away country, you have no idea what's happening. So the goal must be that every building in itself is able to be carbon neutral. What we offer there are some kind of principles on how to get there. Basically, it's part as well of the design and a clear strategy on how to get there, starting from the site, thinking about the direction, what is the user doing, and so forth. The same for the material side, I'll show you later, and this is basically the core of what we're advocating for when it's about operation of existing buildings. You have to have a plan. You have to have a plan. It's not a one-off. You have to check where am I based on real data, based on measured data. And I think this is another thing where really the industry needs to step up, because the financial sectors or others, they don't understand when we say, well, we don't know really the energy consumption of our buildings. This is something no one really understands. So we have to implement monitoring, we have to measure, we have to go from there, and then we have to come up with a plan that we try to be the latest 2050 carbon neutral. It depends. We have buildings that are already very good. They can already shoot for 2030 being carbon neutral. The quicker we get started, the quicker we get better, the more time we have for the more challenging thing. The longer we wait, the more painful and more expensive it will be. And I always think no one really wants to wait for regulation. And I don't know, and I think with buildings we have the opportunity to be already much better than we have to do by law today, and I think this is what we have to understand. The better we are today, the more time we have, and the better we can manage the financial impact on our building stock. And basically to showcase that, what I said in the beginning, we can do it already today. We launched last year at the Expo Real a new award. We call it Climate Positive, because honestly, maybe we're good engineers and designers, but a building is such a complex thing that anyone who says, I'm going to be carbon neutral, is pushing so hard during design and then operation that they're normally carbon positive, meaning that they emit less CO2, that they compensate, they need less energy than they produce. And we said we need to show, especially the politicians, because last year there was a big discussion about the GEG regulation, and we really tried to push them to switch to CO2 away from the energy, looking at the CO2 footprint of buildings. And the politicians were not brave enough, because there was a lot of lobbying going on and a lot of doubts. And we said, well, let's do this award as a greeting as well to the politicians, to show what we can do. And what we did is we awarded last year 11 projects which are climate positive in operation over a period of 12 months, including user consumption. And we had very, very different building types, because it's not difficult to do that with a single family home. This is not difficult because the energy consumption is so low compared to the square footage when you put PV on the roof. And with a good insulation, this is really not the challenge anymore. The challenge is somewhere else. So it's basically for office buildings, what we certified for a city hall. This is the new city hall in Freiburg. Well, it's not so new anymore. This building has a positive CO2 balance over 12 months, including user consumption. And in that user consumption is a cafeteria for the people working there, and is a kindergarten which is connected to that building. And sure, you see all the PV here, they have PV on the roof, it's a very efficient building, but it can be done. It can be done for a public building, and the city of Freiburg didn't throw the money out of the window. So it was just for them an ambitious project, but it was as well economically possible. And we actually awarded the first project, which we were very proud of, for a building outside of Germany in Singapore, which is a very challenging environment, very hot and very humid. And this building actually works without artificial cooling. That has a lot of PV on the roof, and actually, and this is something we really see with very high concern, that in Germany now we see a lot of more ACs coming up, especially in office buildings, high ventilation rates. So whatever we get better in the facade, we basically eat it up by the energy consumption of the technical equipment. And basically what they did, and the engineering company had to do a lot of proof and to build a mock-up for the university principal because they were very concerned. But what happens, especially in these climates, is if the temperature is at a certain high level, you don't feel moving the air, you don't think this is uncomfortable, you feel as a refreshment. This is basically how it works when we're somewhere in the south on vacation, and they brought that into a building. So they have very high ceiling fans, very big ones. They turn very slowly, but they move the air constantly, and they really leave the inside temperature at a very high level, so people feel it's refreshing. They don't feel it's sticky and it's hot, because it's about the difference, and I think this is what we have to as well educate people here in Germany. It is about the difference between outside and inside temperature that makes a difference. If it's very hot outside, just a few degrees lower inside, you already feel like it's okay. So you don't need to have this American comfort level where basically the air is blowing, you need to wear a sweater, it's just freezing cold, and you have then the fog on the glass. This is not what we need, and this is not what is good for us as humans. And so we were very proud that we certified that building with this Climate Positive Award. We had a school, we awarded that award, which was Climate Positive. It's by Augsburg. We had a multifamily home in the middle of Frankfurt here. And now we just awarded 2 weeks ago the next projects, basically 2 school projects, one in Stuttgart, which is a renovation, which through the renovation achieved this carbon positive energy balance, and one in Aalen, which was an addition to an existing school. So maybe my message to you, it can be done, and we just need to have good design. We have to be brave and not make any mistakes, and just as a little outview, one thing is in operation. This is basically what now everyone talks about, and I think this is the main challenge we have today, is to bring operation of buildings down to carbon neutrality somehow, or at least close to. And the next challenge is, how do we deal with the construction material? Construction material is basically in the sector of the industry, but anyway, we as engineers, architects, owners, we have a responsibility as well to not just waste resources and generate CO2 emissions. And when we hear today about carbon neutral buildings, and this is where all this wood trend is coming from, is basically we always will have CO2 emissions from the material and the transport, and we can only compensate that over time, and then we're again at the material side, at the operational side. So we have to have buildings which compensate less, need less energy than they produce. And just maybe as my last slide, I think, or I don't know how my time-wise. Okay, no, then you will get actually a few more. But you know, we always get as well the questions, well, you always talk and it sounds good and you always try to motivate people what to do. And I always like to show that slide because this is basically what we have achieved through certification since we started. This is a representation of the CO2 footprint since 2009 when we started certifying buildings to 2015. Our version 2018 is now just in the market, and we get the first projects in. And what we see is the CO2 footprint, the overall CO2 footprint, the size of the circle gets smaller. So the buildings are getting better. There's a movement, which I think is a very important message for an industry which is not really famous for innovation. And 10 years in the building industry, this is quite fast when you see how it's moving. And what you see as well is the gray part is the operational CO2 emission, and the green one and the gray one is the one from materials. And what we see as well is that we get better in the operational part. So we're able to get more efficient buildings during the operation, and the importance of the material CO2 emissions increase. And if we talk about a carbon neutral building in operation, that means our own optimization, only optimization part is then in the end the material side, which we have to keep in focus or take into focus. So I think this is an important message. There's something moving, and I really don't think that we always have to flip from one trend to another. And I think especially in construction, we just have to stay on track. And this is why it is so important to have a strategy and stick with the strategy and not like 2 or 3 years later jump to the next topic. And this is actually what we see now a lot. Over the last years, it first was energy. Now people talk about CO2. Now they talk about circular economy. They talk about biodiversity, about smart buildings. So it feels like the trends are getting more and more. and I think it's important to have this holistic approach, but never lose the goal out of sight. And you have to stay on track, because otherwise all the things we achieve, especially when we talk about digitalization or smart buildings or ventilation rates, all this, what we're achieving here, will be eaten away by the technology side. So I can just, ask you to be cautious with that and really maybe think about low tech sometimes maybe is better, is more resilient for the future, but don't jump on every train that comes along, because this is not how it works with buildings. And once you have erected a building, you have to live with it for many, many years. And if you just then deconstruct it because it's not modern anymore, you made a mistake, that's a huge waste of resources, of energy, and of CO2 emissions. And then maybe as a little last one, we published 2 years ago this little brochure. You can find that on our website as well, because maybe after listening to me, either you were bored, you were interested, maybe you took something away, but I'm pretty sure you had some things in mind. We always hear it's kind of the German Flüsterpost game. So someone says it and everyone repeats it. And we have some Flüsterpost phenomena when it comes about sustainable buildings. And we said 2 years ago, we cannot hear it anymore. This is sometimes, it feels like you're a motivational trainer. You know, you're like, come on, let's do it. You show numbers, you show facts. And then the person across from the table, just happened to me the other day from the city official. And I showed him what I will show you now. And he was looking at me, he's like, I don't believe it. I said, well, if it's about believing something, then we're having a completely different problem. So we said, no more excuses anymore, keine Ausreden mehr. You can do sustainable buildings, and there are some things we always are confronted with. And one thing is the costs. When I introduce myself, that happens a lot to me. I'm like, yeah, I'm from the DGNB. Oh, this is expensive. This is the first reaction many people have when they hear sustainable buildings. And then I always ask, this is amazing. You were able to just do a calculation in your head of a building you don't know, at a location you don't know, and compare it to what? To a no-quality building? Because we don't have a benchmark for non-sustainable buildings, and no one actually knows really the difference, because no one, or I don't know anyone, in all the studies that have been done, no one has done a full design of a I don't care building, let's call it this way, a sustainable building all the way to the tender, because this is where you have to get the real costs, all the way to the negotiation with the construction company, with the building material suppliers, and then you would have two numbers, but no one has ever done that, because no one is actually thinking about it this way. So when people think either they're going down the sustainable way or they go down the I don't care way, and the ones who are like I don't care, they always like to say, oh, this was more expensive. And no one questions that. I don't know if it ever happens to you, but you meet people and they're sitting here in a room and someone would say, we looked into that, it was too expensive. And then there's no one, well, except me, I'm quite annoying, but there's no one who would say, really? Can I see the numbers? That doesn't happen. Everyone is like, yeah, it was more expensive, yeah. So what we did is we did an analysis of the buildings we've certified. These are all then sustainable buildings. And what you see here is basically the construction cost versus the certification level. And if the Flüsterpost rumor would be true, you would expect that a platinum certified building, that you would see a line. So the higher the award level, the more expensive it gets. Now maybe you have the same moment we had in our offices when our team presented these numbers and it was just silence in the room. We were all looking at that. And then we realized you don't see anything. You cannot try to put a curve, a Trendlinie, whatever into this, because there is no connection. And we know many, many buildings, we know many owners who did a DGNB certification and they said, we stayed in budget. We are having the same costs compared to a regular office building defined in the BKI. This is really what I can just really ask you. If you work in that field, or if you're interested in that field, don't accept these Flüsterpost results why things are not happening. And it is not more expensive. It's about good design. And I can just tell you, I know a lot of buildings where the certification decision or the decision to be sustainable was made too late. And then what happens as well is that sometimes, then mostly, the owner then has made the decision, then the auditor, our trained person, comes back and tells, well, this is a gold certification, and then the owner is like, no. We can only have platinum because it's, this is how we are. And then they start to change things in design. And I don't know how to translate it well in Germany, but there's this practice, which is not a good practice, is basically design during construction. So you're already on the way of planning, and then you start changing things, and that makes it always complicated and more expensive. And no one has asked that person to make that call. And then, sure, there are buildings where they make this call, and then they change the facade system, they do really crazy things, and then they're like, oh, this was more expensive. Yes, it was more expensive because you did a poor job designing the building, and you did a very poor job right in the beginning to know what you want. And this is, when you do it right and you start right from the beginning, you can do a very economic, sustainable building. And no one forces you to use the DGNB certification, which is the quality assurance, and always go for the highest. But you have to go for what is right for you. And I think this kind of honesty and really looking behind it is quite important. Another thing, another gut Flüsterpost phenomenon is we don't need to certify because in Germany we have so many codes and regulations, which is true. We're very good in Germany to define everything and have Excel lists for everything, and that is really sometimes not fun. But it's not true that this is enough. It is never enough. When we look at the climate Paris Agreement, then we all know we're not good enough and we're not on track to get there. But we have other codes and we have other things, especially like on the social cultural topics, on other things. There are no laws or regulations for that in Germany. There's no one, except if you do a certification, who tells you, think about what do you offer for your user. I mean, the architect would tell you, but this is not regulated in Germany. So what we did is as well, we did an analysis of what we have certified in the office segment, and we compared it to if you would in the DGNB system, just do what you have to do required by law in Germany, you would achieve 12% in the DGNB certification. Certification in new construction starts at 50%. So you would be far, far away from just fulfilling the minimum certification level. And then what we did was basically we looked at what is the average we certify. And there we have to be honest. I mean, we have a lot of good buildings. They don't do a complete redesign because of a DGNB certification, but they have certain requirements already implemented because there's a market standard. There's a certain standard in the office market you have to provide if you want to sell a building well, if you want to rent it well, or if you want to have your employees to be happy. And basically, this is already in the gold segment. So the average of what we certify is gold in the office segment. And maybe they do certain things they do more because of DGNB when it comes to building material requirements and so forth. But they do a lot of things already because of the market standard. And if you think you're already there, and then you do a little bit more, that cannot be too much to ask for, and that cannot be super expensive. And I think this is what we as well have to realize. We already do a lot of things better and more. And so we cannot always blame it on sustainability. And I'd like to close with that. This is as well an evaluation with how many people do you reach with a sustainable building. It's not just the architect, it's not just the owner, it's the design team, it's a construction company, it's all the people working on the site. This is a traditional multi-family home, the people living in it, the neighbors, the visitors, and then you can reach up to 6,000 people with one sustainable project. And I think this is what it comes down to. We have a responsibility to do better, to do more, and we can do it already. So thank you very much.